I will move that Representative Vajay's bill, House File 2687, be brought in front of the committee. And I understand that you have a DE1 amendment, Representative.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Could you briefly describe it?
Yeah, actually, I can describe it. Otherwise, I mean, it is essentially the new bill, so I don't know if you want to adopt it and then I describe it, or describe it and then adopt.
If you could briefly describe it first.
Okay, sure. So the bill as amended now does two things. It limits private equity companies from buying single-family homes completely. And the second part is that it also limits corporations and partnerships from owning more than 50 single-family homes. And the enforcement would happen through the Attorney General's office, and that is what the DE does.
Any questions to the DE? If not, we'll adopt it and then proceed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The DE is adopted and the bill is in the shape the author prefers. Representative Bajaj, to your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since that was the bulk of it, I'll kind of be brief, but I'll touch on some of the highlights from the conversations we've been having around this bill. So House File 2687 is essentially now narrowed to a bill that would hopefully be a first step to returning the homeownership market back to the people. As I just briefly described, the bill now only limits private equity companies from buying single-family homes, and it also limits corporations and partnerships from owning more than 50 single-family homes, and enforcement would happen through the Attorney General's office. So this bill in this form is focused on the simplest part of this discussion to lay a foundation that we can build upon in the future. Homeownership in Minnesota is something that continues to be out of reach for Minnesotans of color and working Minnesotans. The reasons are varied, but corporate ownership of single-family homes is definitely a factor. According to reports from the Federal Reserve, Pew Charitable Trust, and reporting done by the Star Tribune, corporate entities are purchasing more homes in the marketplace to the detriment of many first-term home buyers. Corporate ownership doubled their share of the market beginning in 2026, and while some of the research that the Minneapolis Fed has done is beginning to show some stabilization in those purchases, when you dig deeper, you see that investor purchases are still concentrated in low-income neighborhoods. Communities like Northeast Minneapolis and the suburbs of Fridley and Hopkins, in those areas, corporate home ownership of single-family homes was as high as 30%, 24%, and 27%, respectively. In many of those areas, the share of large corporate owners is still growing. So this means that in those communities, families and working people are unable to compete with corporate owners who can offer cash and forego inspection fees or pay tens of thousands of dollars over the asking price. This leaves working Minnesotans the only option to rent from these corporate landlords if they want to stay in the neighborhood. And over time, that could lead to a concentration of poverty or a lack of amenities in that neighborhood. And part of the reason why a bill like this is necessary to begin to address the issue of corporate owners, who sometimes can be absentee landlords, those landlords then have limited property management oversight, and they don't address and respond to repairs in a timely fashion. So we also hear stories from people that say that sometimes the only time you hear from one of these corporate landlords is when the rent is due. And some of the most egregious issues we saw a couple of years ago with Havenbrook Homes out in Minneapolis. By limiting the amount of single-family homes that corporate entities can own, hopefully we can have more homeowners that are present in their communities and building their wealth. And with that, I'll turn to testifiers.
Thank you, Representative Bajaj. Thank you, Representative Bajaj. I'm looking for my first testifier who I don't see, so I'm going to go next to Ellen Solly. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and members. My name is Ellen Solly. I'm president of the Family Housing Fund. The Family Housing Fund is a 46-year-old organization that helps communities address their housing challenges. And one of the areas of our work has been in the area of single-family rentals. We have done a few things in this area, and informing our work is the renter experience of living in single-family rental homes. We worked with the University of Minnesota Center for Urban and Regional Affairs on 2 research projects, and in 2024, we worked with a national organization called the Private Equity Stakeholders Project to understand the role of private equity in the Minnesota market. And through this research, we wanted to understand what works well and what the challenges are for renters, as well as understand who the players are in this asset class. First, we broke up the ownership into categories based on size of their portfolio. Micro owners own 1 unit, small owners own 2 to 5 units, Medium owners own 6 to 20 units, and then large owners own more than 20 units in this single-family asset. And in our data set of 42,000 single-family rentals, 86% of the owners are micro or small owners, 5% are medium owners, and about 8.5% represent this large ownership of more than 20 units, and are more traditional owners or investors, as well as REITs and private equity. And we learned a couple of things that are really important as you consider this legislation. The first is there is a tipping point for effective single-family rental property management. And as the portfolio size increases beyond 14 units, the renter experience declines, deteriorates significantly. Rents rise consistently as the portfolio size increases, and specifically renters of large owners, large landlords in that 20 unit and more report rents of more than $200 per unit compared to the micro units. And almost 2/3 of the renters living in large landlord homes reportedly noticed the need for repairs immediately upon moving in, and further reported a reduced responsiveness on the part of their landlord when they've reported repairs. So from our experience and our research, the single-family data suggests large landlords of more than 20 units of single-family rental are the most disruptive and difficult in the rental market. The proposed legislation focuses on private equity and investor owners of more than 50 units of single-family rentals, and it's an important step of managing the most troublesome part of this asset class, while still allowing for renter choice in those that want to live in a single-family rental home. So we support this legislation and appreciate your leadership on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Mark Bruner, Minnesota Manufactured Home Association. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. I'm Mark Bruner. I'm president of the Manufactured Modular Home Association of Minnesota. MMHA is celebrating its 75th anniversary as a trade association this year, so we've certainly seen a lot of changes over the years in terms of our homes and business model. There are approximately 900 manufactured home communities in the state of Minnesota that are licensed by the Department of Health. There are about 15 plants that build manufactured and modular homes in Minnesota. We're the largest source of non-subsidized attainable housing in the state. We have a couple concerns with the bill, and I have previously expressed those to the author, so it's not a surprise. And actually, to put our concerns in perspective, 80% of all manufactured homes sold in Minnesota go on private property or as real estate. The other 20% go in manufactured home communities or on leased land. So essentially, the scope of the bill, we're not here to argue against the manufactured homes that are on private property being included. However, we do believe that there needs to be a separation for manufactured home communities or manufactured home parks where the homes are considered single-family homes. They're taxed at a class rate of 1% as a site-built home is. However, they're on leased land. And so it's our belief that to alleviate any confusion that manufactured home park communities should fall under the exceptions as well as a couple of the others that are listed there. And we think the language right now is too broad, but that we have manufactured home communities who do have rental homes. On occasion, there may be a vacancy, and for cash flow purposes, they need to, make sure that they have an income stream, so they may have a rental home, that kind of thing. So the bill doesn't, necessarily preclude, them from being brought in on that basis because they have a rental home that they've acquired versus single-family homes, which is really the intent of the bill. So what we're seeking is just that exception or carve-out for manufactured home communities, not homes themselves on private property. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Paul Egger, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs with the Minnesota Realtors. Welcome back to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Again, my name is Paul Egger. I'm Senior Vice President of Governmental Affairs for the Minnesota Realtors Association. Thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. Just to share a few thoughts about the housing market that are relevant to the topic addressed in Representative Agbaje's bill today. Also, we want to share just a few concerns with the policy approach taken here with market prohibitions and restrictions. And then finally, I just want to leave you with a few thoughts on some alternative approaches that you may want to consider moving forward. I would also like to thank Representative Agbaje for her generosity and time. She has had an open door over the years as she's worked on this issue and other issues, and I really appreciate it and look forward to continuing the dialogue as we move forward. Minnesota Realtors supports getting more Minnesotans into home ownership. It's a priority that I've testified about in front of this committee over the years. It's a priority that we've worked with Representative Agbaje specifically and members of this committee through the development of the first generation home buyers down payment assistance program. It's a priority that we want to continue to work with the legislature on moving forward. But just a few thoughts about the housing market that I think are relevant to the bill before you today. First, just history is a guide. We have a market right now that this committee is well aware after the discussions the past couple of weeks, especially yesterday, that's characterized by low inventory and high demand that's driving up prices because supply isn't able to meet that demand. However, we also learned in the aftermath of the 2008 housing crash what happens when there are not enough buyers for the supply that ends up on the market in a difficult economy. And that means single-family homes can go through foreclosure, sit vacant, or fall into disrepair. Markets are cyclical. We haven't always had a low inventory and high demand situation like we have today, and the market will not always be like this. And we believe that buyers and sellers both benefit from having a free and open real estate market. We want to just urge some caution in assuming that any investor purchased property would simply have been purchased by an owner-occupant. Some properties purchased by investors need significant work before they're ready to go to market. And then just to share a few concerns with the market prohibitions and restrictions. This bill would change state law to address concerns with the current market. At some point, this market will shift, and MNR believes that the policy response to this bill could create unintended consequences. Having a real estate market that does not prohibit or restrict investors can be beneficial to sellers, particularly when that buyer demand drops. There are also situations that arise for individuals and families. Think of situations where there's a divorce or a job loss or a transfer to another part of the country where a timely sale and immediate closing is critical. And sometimes an investor is the only party that is willing to take on that property at that point in time. Our realtor members often tell me too that there are situations in every market, no matter how high demand is and low inventory is, that a property just doesn't sell. And so in those situations, sometimes an investor is the only party willing to take on the risk, put in the effort to bring that property up to the point that it will be ready to offer up in the real estate market. And finally, Mr. Chair, just real briefly, we would encourage you to consider all different options for addressing the concerns that this bill is attempting to address. And some of those ideas that we'd like to share with you include a capital gains tax exemption for investors who sell single-family homes to owner-occupant buyers, a corporate income tax credit per unit sold to owner-occupants, a deed tax exemption for investors selling to owner-occupants, continued investment in first-time and first-generation homebuyer assistance to help those buyers be more competitive in the market. And then finally, this committee had a great discussion yesterday on the Starter Homes Act. That's probably the best way to minimize the role of investors in the market is to increase the supply of housing. So again, thank you for the time to share with you our thoughts on this bill and this issue. And again, look forward to continuing the conversation with Representative Badger throughout the session. Thank you.
Thank you. That is the list of folks. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, excuse me. Virtually, we have Rachel Ruby Jones, a Minneapolis resident, who's going to testify virtually.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair Howard and members of the committee. My name is Rachel Jones, and I am testifying today in support of HF 2687, as I have firsthand experience renting from a private equity landlord, an experience that has literally changed my life. I signed a lease with Havenbrook in February of 2019 to move into a single family rental home in North Minneapolis, even though it was apparent that the property was not well cared for. However, I was in a vulnerable position. I had a toddler, I was pregnant, and was finally leaving an abusive relationship. I needed stable housing quickly, and I felt I had few realistic options. I remember signing the lease with little time to consider alternatives. Soon after moving in, serious problems began. One Saturday afternoon in the spring, as the snow was beginning to melt, the basement started to flood. I called the emergency line as it was the weekend. After speaking with someone in a call center in Georgia, I was informed they would reach out to management. When I was finally contacted by management, I was told there would be no repair until the weekend or until after the weekend. I was asked to wait while water continued to flood my basement, and it remained in my home. At the same time, management also directed me to keep an extension cord running along the basement floor that was plugged and have it plugged in continuously to a humidifier, despite my lease explicitly prohibiting any electrical cord running along the basement floor. Looking back, it's starkly comical how ridiculous the situation was. If it were not for the fact that I was literally scared of electrocution for myself, but most especially for my toddler. Over the next 2 years, the unit had repeated habitability and safety issues. One thing I vividly remember from all the fighting with the company was when I would finally reach a real life person on the other end of the phone, I was treated with such disdain. It was like it was my fault for not being able to afford my own home. Just another renter, just a person to farm rent money from. After 2 years of unresolved issues, I joined a lawsuit against the company because reporting problems produced no meaningful repairs or accountability. My experience was not isolated. Many neighbors, especially BIPOC families using rental assistance and subsidies, renting from the same company as me, experienced worse conditions. They were actually amazed I occasionally talked to someone in management. I know a mother whose child suffered lead poisoning while living in one of the company's homes. The company's defense was that they had provided informational material about lead and therefore were not responsible. Renters as profit centers, nothing more. From my perspective, private equity ownership creates a perverse incentives. Properties are treated as assets to be optimized for investors rather than as homes that require timely maintenance, safe conditions, and accountability to residents. When maintenance is deferred, costs and risks are shifted onto tenants, many of whom are low income, have limited mobility, or lack of resources to pursue remedies. The result is increased health risks, more housing instability, and families forced to endure substandard living conditions. I urge you to consider the human impact behind these ownership practices and pass HF 2687 to help ensure homes are managed with accountability and to prevent companies that prioritize profit over people from owning single-family residences. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in attendance that would like to testify? If not, we can move on to member discussion. And first on the list, I have Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Agbaje, I will say that you've changed the bill quite a bit since we first saw this, and I appreciate that. But I will say that it still presupposes that this is a problem that is more than just anecdotal. And if you'll remember, members, and with the chair's indulgence, we did pass out an article from Jerusalem Demsis, who I believe used to write, I think she's moved on somewhere else, for The Atlantic, which is not exactly known as a far right-wing polemic rag. It is anything but that. And I just want to say that this is not, in my estimation, the problem that it's being made out to be. And I know you've elevated it, the number of houses to 50, and I appreciate that. But I just want to stand up for just the idea that this is happening en masse, because I don't believe it is, and I don't believe that my vote will ever be secured to effectively be limiting the free market in the way that this does. So I will say, and I'm not going to go through it page by page, Mr. Chair, because I'd probably get gavelled down, but I would encourage members to read this article because it is quite illustrative, and I think it is an antipode to the argument that Representative Agbaje is making. I do have one particular question to the bill, if Chair, you would. I would like to ask Representative Agbaje, lines 3.4 through 3.5 through 3.6 of your DE. Could you detail the mechanism with which the Attorney General may enforce this section pursuant to 8.31? Because in your last version of the bill, I believe that the Attorney General could force sale of, if this language were to happen, if you had 52 houses, those could be forced into auction over the objection of the owner and without any delay.
Representative Agbaje?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Nash. So to answer your question, right now what it is the enforcement would kind of happen through the ways the Attorney General is sort of alerted to issues or violations of law. So it would have to be people or renters or other business owners that know that someone is violating the law, alert the Attorney General, in the same way that the Havenbrook situation happened to their office. In previous language, we did have a more robust structure of divestiture, which I'm hoping that if this moves on to the next committee hearing, that we can have more of a conversation there of what a divestiture schedule would look like. I have heard that it needs to be longer, and so hopefully there could be language that shows a longer time period and a different mechanism of how people would have to divest if they went over the limit. And Mr. Chair, if you would, to the earlier comments, yes, there are a number of articles, including the Atlantic article. I have read other articles that try to downplay the issue. And while on a numbers scale, yes, compared to everything, you could say these are low numbers. But what we are seeing that is happening in other states around the country is the fact that people are being closed out of this market because there are buyers there who really can just pay cash, pay tens of thousands of dollars over the asking price. Or what they also do is they buy up huge swaths of neighborhoods and ensure that the people who then live in those neighborhoods are only renters and they're not building any personal wealth for themselves. And so while we can quibble on the fact of how big of a problem is it actually a problem, how much of an effect does it have on the market, one of the things that we do know is that when people feel a certain way, particularly in economics, that actually really dictates a lot of their behaviors in that market. And so if we want to continue to promote home ownership for people, I think we need to take out one of the barriers that people are looking at and seeing is a barrier to them getting their first home.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to press the point, Representative Agbaje, again. What is the mechanism of divestiture? Because unless you haven't developed that and you're doing it at the next committee stop, but I don't have 8.31 in front of me or committed to memory. You might. but is it forced sale through the Attorney General, as was in the last iteration of the bill?
Representative Bajaj.
Mr. Chair, Representative Dash, no. So the enforcement mechanism through the Attorney General's office is there would be a lawsuit, and then it would be a remedy that they find appropriate. So with, in the Havenbrook situation, they found that the appropriate remedy was a divestiture and a movement of those properties. But in other cases, you know, they could decide, say if someone is at 51 or 52, that perhaps, you know, there's some other way for them to get into compliance, or maybe they could pay something to the state, or if there's harm done to a renter in that situation, maybe, you know, there's something there. So, but we will need to, and which is why I'm hoping that we can get to the next committee, flesh that out a little bit more, because I too would also want it to give a little bit more directive to the Attorney General's office rather than just what they deem would be an effective remedy.
Anything further, Representative Nash?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure I heard you would like for the Attorney General to be able to force people into auction. Okay, we'll talk offline. Question for you or nonpartisan. Your effective date is set at August 1st, 2026. And it appears, and I just want to clarify this for the record and for anybody who may get caught up in this, your bill, were it to become law, only applies to situations that happen after August 1st of 2026. So I could have 400 houses prior to this, and you're not going to send the Attorney General to make me pare down to 50?
Representative Bajaj.
Mr. Chair, under this language, we would not be able to do that. It's a forward-looking bill, so this is why moving forward, we would want to talk about divestiture, because that could be something that could address purchases that were made before the effective date that are over the limit. But in this current language right now, no, it would only be future-looking.
Question for the chair.
Representative Nash.
You're laying this over and we're going to have another time where we take this up and discuss it, or is it your intention to wait for Chair Igo to return and then just vote it out? Or what is your desired pathway for this? Because as you know, I'm deeply troubled by this. So I want to make sure that we have a full-throated conversation, and I would like to know what the pathway when you bring this back is intended.
Thanks, Representative Nash. I want to talk with my co-chair about exact path, but as I think we'll have a full hearing today, and you can anticipate when I have the gavel next, we'll bring this bill up. I guess we'll see how the conversation goes today. If, you know, co-chair Igo hasn't had a chance to weigh in, so potentially we can have more discussion, but the hope would be to have a vote and hopefully move the bill on in the process at our next hearing.
And Mr. Chair, where would you refer it to, and what is the, maybe the author knows, what is the proposed number of committee stops that this would have to be?
I think the motion will be to send to judiciary, but I don't know if Representative Bajaj has anything additional in terms of committee stops.
The committee path is housing and judiciary.
Representative Nash.
Curious as to whether it would have to go to commerce, given that you're regulating commerce in a way. So when we talk about online, but it seems to me that would be a very logical stop along the way. But once again, I appreciate the work, I really do. When this first came to us, it was a very aggressive bill, and I recognize and commend the work, but I'm still not there, and don't anticipate getting there. But you gave it a good run, so thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next, Representative Ray Rauer.
Thank you, Chair. So I thank you for this article from The Atlantic, Meet the Latest Housing Crisis Scapegoat. I'm looking at the top of page 7. Says housing is primarily unaffordable in this country because of a persistent undersupply. So now I have another piece of evidence that supports that we have a lack of supply of housing. And our bill, our Starter Homes Act yesterday, really helps with that.
Always on message, Representative Ray Rauer. I appreciate that very, very much.
Okay. But that being said, we may not have that is like the problem of why we have high cost of housing. We know it's still a small percent of private equity that owns these homes in Minnesota, but we do have the beginning of a problem. And we have seen this buying up by corporations be a problem in specific neighborhoods in Minnesota, and we have seen it in other states. So because of that, I really do think it is our work, and which is why I'm glad that you have this bill here and I support this bill. I think it's our work to prevent problems, not to wait for them to become a big problem and then try to go backwards. So I'm so excited to be on the front end of this to potentially prevent this being a big problem in Minnesota by putting some of these guardrails on private equity buying housing. So I support the bill. Thank you very much.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Chair Howard, Representative Raybauer. We do agree on the one thing, that's nice to agree, is that we are lacking housing. Where we don't agree on is how we fix that. So, thank you, Chair, or sorry, Representative Bajaj. I have just a few questions, basically. One of them is, I remember back in 2008, I was working for a plumbing company that did a lot of remodeling and stuff like that. And during the day, private equity was coming in and seen as heroes, because we had most of our business was done in St. Paul and Minneapolis, and they were devastated. I mean, there was neighborhoods that nobody invested in. These homes were not livable. They were all condemned and all that stuff, and the only people buying them was private equity. So my concern is, how far away are we from the next housing crisis? And the same thing happens, and nobody has the money but these companies to come in and do that. So I think we always have to go back to history and realize history always repeats itself. And then all of a sudden we're in a situation where nobody can address that. But that built into the question I had is, these are the people who it does not apply to. Is companies primarily building or rehabilitating homes? Now, again, the private equity companies were coming in and buying the homes and rehabilitating them, and then either turning them into rentals because nobody was there to buy them, or they did sell them. So then would that, if a private equity company came in and remodeled it or rehabbed a home, are they exempt? And how long would they be exempt for?
Representative Bajaj.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Johnson. I think you're looking at the exceptions that show up on 2.29, and here's the first time we have it, 1.16. So we specify it's a nonprofit organized under Chapter 317A, so not a private entity. So again, the private equity company and the corporation would not be exempt from the work that they do of rehabbing and reselling them. So it would only be the nonprofit organization.
Can I ask Representative Bajaj, if they, I guess this is a numbers game, but if somebody had 40, they rehabbed something and then sold it, they would have one less, right? But you're saying if it's above 50.
If it's only if it's above 50 or if they meet the private
Up
equity
to
definition.
private. Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. What would be, and I know Representative Nash was kind of going down that line, is right now this is a forward-looking bill, but you said you kind of gave the impression that future views of this would possibly go backwards to people who already own them. So I guess I'm really wondering is, depending upon the time of the market and where the market is, what would be the timeline for sale? And say the private equity company started trying to sell and nobody's buying. Would they then be forced to keep reducing the price until they got somebody to buy it? Or what would be the plan there?
Representative Bajaj.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Johnson. So as I stated, the divestiture schedule is still being worked on, so there's many different ideas and many different ways to do it. Some of the ideas that have been presented to me talk about a lengthy timeline, anywhere around 4 or 5 years. I've also heard ideas around the fact that perhaps only a certain number of private equity sales would be allowed in the market per year. So then if once that quota is met, they wouldn't be able to sell anymore. There's also opportunities that we've talked about of maybe ensuring that if there's a renter in the home already, that family has the first opportunity to purchase if they're able to. So there's a variety of ways to kind of do that piece of it, but and even your suggestion of decreasing the price could be part of it, but we don't have a specific mechanism yet. And so when that's developed, I'm happy to talk more about it.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that answer. I guess, as Representative Nash touched on, what we're discussing is a lot of things that haven't been worked on yet. And those are the ones that concern me, because what is the plan going forward? Because I don't think we're getting enough information. And my concern too is just looking forward, is I think that's one of our jobs, is to look forward, what if and what may happen, is the people who are renting are the ones that will be harmed. And the fact that we received a notice, we must divest, I know you can't buy it, so now you're going to have to find other housing, and all of a sudden we have now some people that are homeless, and now we have to figure out how do we help them. And so my concern would be trying to force people to sell would create some victims that they're very innocent, and that would be my concern. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. Vice Chair Dotson.
Thank you, Chair Howard. Representative Abaje. This bill's gone a long ways. I remember when it first came in front of us, and you've worked hard to get it to where it's at, so I respect that and I appreciate that. The question I've got is sometimes we have to be careful what we wish for. As we're moving forward here, I think Representative Johnson had touched a little bit about that. One side, we're asking for more housing, for more rental units. With this taking place, we've actually seen that there have been more housing units provided. Are we creating a problem by eliminating that opportunity to take place? If I recall back in, I believe it was 2008, 2009, I don't remember which administration that was actually encouraging hedge funds to come in and actually purchase and acquire rentals and get them on the market just so we can clean up the market, the real estate market. With that said, the question I've got, can you give more of a clarity on private equity? Would that affect LLCs, private, more small private landlords as well?
Representative Igbaje.
Yes. So the private equity definition that we have is one that focuses on companies that are focused on raising and returning capital for investment, development, or disposal of specific assets. So that's a really higher level class of company. On the corporation side, we are looking at those partnerships, corporations, real estate investment trusts, managed funds. And so these are also going to be these larger corporations. To the question of like the rental market, I mean, there will still be a rental market. Obviously, the limit here is 50. So if you're a corporation and you have, 45 homes in your portfolio that you're renting, that is still going to be part of the rental market. We'll have a number of corporations that do that. We'll also have the small mom and pop shops that own 1 or 2 or 3 units that rent out. So we'll want to make sure that there's like a good mix. But what we're doing is this bill is laying a foundation to ensure that some of the biggest players that can buy up huge swaths at one time and really kind of close out the market for some of these smaller investors, these small mom and pop shops and individuals, that they're no longer in the playing field. And speaking to different federal administrations that have kind of tried to play in the housing market, our current federal administration right now is actually saying that they don't want private equity and hedge funds in the single-family home housing market. So I think there's actually, interestingly enough, some good alignment there with our federal government in the path forward that people would like to see.
Anything further, Representative Dotson?
Just a final comment. Thank you, Chair Howard. Representative Abaje, I look at working more on this, and actually, I think we can get somewhere that, as we see things are migrating in the right direction, but we're not there. So let's have more discussion offline on this. Thank you.
Vice Chair Kozlowski.
Thanks, Chair Howard and Rep. Igbaje for bringing this bill forward. I think the fact that we just had a bill for investing in more public housing and then to come right back to the juxtaposition of now we're tackling private equity in corporate ownership in housing just speaks to the issue that in Minnesota we have 95% privatized housing. Of course, myself and many believe that housing is a human right, not a commodity for highest bidder. So I really appreciate the work on this front. I am a big fan of the private equity stakeholder project. If you go to their website, you can actually track the private equity industry and just their whole model of business that's really upside down, making it upside down for Minnesotans and Americans across housing. They're gobbling up healthcare. I would also say they're trying to buy our public goods. They are stomping on our public energy utilities, and I can say that as a community that just had our public utility turned over to a private equity as a warning shot that this is not the way that is going to be the best serving for Minnesotans by way of transparency. We see what they do across all of these industries in rent hikes, that they cut workers' wages, just on and on and on. And you may recall when we talked about corporate landlord ownership, was it 2 sessions ago, 23? I don't know, it all blurs together. At that time in Duluth, we were dealing with the Cheerios challenge, if you recall. We had a billionaire in Kathy Cargill who bought up over 24 houses and parcels right on Park Point, which is pristine area with some of the best single-family homes that she called pieces of crap. And she said we peed in her Cheerios because Duluthians stood up to say that this is not the way forward. We do not want this corporate ownership. We want these homes for people in our community, for young people to be able to stay here, for workers looking to work in our manufacturing and other industries. And what happened? She turned around and demolished all of those properties, and they're all sitting now either torn down or sitting vacant. And when we scan out nationally for private equity, I think it's pretty interesting that we have a president who I would not normally agree with, but on this topic we find common ground, just as the Yes to Homes package. So whether you're for this administration or you're more like Zoran Mamdani, I think it's pretty interesting when we come together and bring our sides. And this is one. Private equity owns 2.5 million units nationwide, and that's actually 10% of our housing in the country. We've seen them gobble up multifamily, single-family homes, manufactured. And I quote from a letter from Blackstone to their investors in 2023. The structural shortage of housing has resulted in pricing power of rental assets. We'll also note that Blackstone is utilizing and colluding with RealPage and YieldStar software that's working to set rent price hikes across their properties. And that comes from lawsuits in Washington to Arizona to North Carolina. And I'll also note that, on average, they've increased rents at 38%. They've ramped up evictions as well as foreclosures. And so I think this just speaks to, and I know you're working on it, a divestment plan, bringing forward work around just cause, as well as the work that we have to ban this corporate collusion. And I'll just end with a quote from our president that he wrote and noted, after indicating that he's going to take steps to ban this institutional investment, that Blackstone stock fell 5.6%, and I think that speaks to Americans see through the BS. But in this post, Trump said people live in homes and not in corporations, and I agree. So thank you.
Just make a few comments before we go to the bill. Representative Kozlowski, you stole my bit. I was going to read from our president as well, and maybe we cut this tape for us. Democrats reading, saying supportive things about President Trump, but. This could be an area for us to work in a bipartisan fashion centered around the power imbalance for regular folks trying to get to the American dream. And we talked a lot about that yesterday. It's too hard. It's too hard because we don't have enough homes, and it's also too hard because the deck's stacked against regular folks when they're trying to purchase a home. As Representative Bajaj mentioned, we've heard story after story of folks getting outbid by all cash offers by these large entities. And I do think this is a problem now, by the way. We have entire suburban communities, as reported by the Star Tribune, that have upwards of 20 30% of their homes being owned by private business and entire communities. And we see in other regions of the state a huge concentration of this. And so it really behooves of us to get ahead of the problem, one that is still here, in a way that just puts more power and agency into all of our constituents. That is the core of this bill and why I think it's important. And I would say this is a pretty modest version of this bill. We're just talking about targeting the largest of the large actors here, and I think there's a lot of ways we could even increase more power in the hands of Minnesotans, like creating a true opportunity to purchase so that it's regular folks that have the first crack at buying a home, not some faceless mega corporation. And so I appreciate the work on this bill. I think it's important. And just vote with your president, and we can move this one forward. Representative Bajaj.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee members. I always like bringing this bill forward because we get lots of really good discussion, and I always think we get a little bit of movement. So, Nash, we may get you there eventually. But I would just want to kind of close and say we are more and more seeing that the United States as a whole is definitely a playground for corporations. In many areas of life, they have found ways to continue to extract as much wealth from poor and working class people as much as possible. And unfortunately, one of the ways that they've decided to do that is through our housing. Our housing, where it should be a safe place for us to go home to, a refuge, a place for us to recharge, a place for us to actually start to build our own wealth. But instead, they have decided that they took advantage of a situation after the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, and they've never left the marketplace. And so they've decided that they can buy up as many houses as they want, rent them back to us, and keep raising the price until who knows when. And so I'm hopeful that something like this can be a good foundational starter of figuring out when do we bring the homeownership marketplace back to real people, back to families. Minnesota can be leading on this, and in fact, there are many other states, even red states like Iowa and Kentucky, that are also looking at banning private equity and large corporations from buying up the homes in their states as well. And so I hope that Minnesota will continue to lead on this conversation, and that we'll find a place that hopefully enough of us will be supportive of, and we can continue to build on from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Bajaj. We'll see you next week.
Actually, in 5 minutes.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Stay up there. You see, you can never quit the Housing Committee, Representative Bajaj. But we will lay the bill over and plan to take it up next week.